Hey, welcome to the play-in episode of Bouncing Around, where we're going to discuss all the play-in stuff with, of course, over there, Evin Gualberto, the wonderful basketball genius that he is, discussing it with me, Marv, from Home Alone. And so was that good? Was that a good joke? Do I bear enough resemblance? All 4 games, that's right. And we're here to give you the breakdown. The small things that made these games go, what won them and what lost them. I hope you're ready because truly we're entering playoff form and we will be bouncing around.
Very superstitious, writings on the wall. Very superstitious.
So, little conceit to all of this. I read, shout out NBA Underground, Noah. I read his latest piece, and it starts with an intro, and then he just goes, "You're not really here for the intro. I'm just going to jump in." So, I'm just going to jump in. Doug McDermott. It was 4-3 with 10 minutes, 30 seconds, 10:40 left to play in the first. Then Doug McDermott scored 16 points and assisted twice before being subbed out with 51 seconds left. The Hornets generated 24 points in the first quarter to the Pacers' 40. Doug McDermott accounted for half of that, 16 points, 2 assists for 2 field goals. Just want to quickly break down some of what he did because that's the story of the game, really. After the Pacers blew it open early, it was over. The Hornets didn't really seem like they wanted to be there, so we won't spend that much time on them. Doug's first basket came on, shout out to always friend of the pod, Caitlin Cooper. She called this inbounds play basket weaving. So the basket weaving action is going to happen, and then Doug is actually going to get the ball deep against Bismack Biyombo. He kicks it back to Malcolm Brogdon, and Brogdon is able to take a short jumper / jump hook, whatever it is. McDermott put back. Simple, easy. Next time down, again, nothing complicated. McDermott is going to get an early pitch from Sabonis in the middle of the floor, pulls up from deep over Biyombo, splash. Next possession, or next score rather, is Sabonis is this time going to set a wide pin down for Doug McDermott to come off. Miscommunication by, actually, I wouldn't even say it's a miscommunication. Terry Rozier just took a bad angle. Doug McDermott catches, splashes on that wide pin down. Next time down, actually, very little movement from Doug on this one. Sabonis starts to attack on a drive in the middle of the floor. He has Terry Rozier on him for whatever reason. Again, this game all sort of blends together, so I can't really remember how it happened, if it was a lack of effort, lack of communication, but I can tell you both are an issue for a shooter like Doug McDermott to get this open. So Sabonis drives middle, Doug just relocates to the corner. It's not really even a relocate, he just slides to the corner, catches, splashes. The next score, real simple. Doug flashes to the middle of the floor. So Justin Holiday is going to come up to the top of the key, receive the ball as Malcolm Brogdon is swinging it across, and then McDermott gets an exit screen from Sabonis to catch and shoot in the corner. Again, nothing complicated, just Doug McDermott being Doug McDermott. So those are all of his made field goals. With under 2 minutes left to play in the quarter, Doug is going to get a dribble handoff from Sabonis, drifting into the right corner area. He's going to drive. Cody Zeller gets beat around the edges here, and McDermott is going to get a paint touch. And then Ed Sumner is going to 45 cut right in, basically an uncontested layup. The last of McDermott's damage done to the Hornets is TJ McConnell is going to bring the ball back out after attacking on in the right corner area. He's going to bring the ball back out. At the same time, Doug is relocating to that right corner. TJ is going to throw him a short bounce pass, and Doug is able to jab, attack, and comes off a Sabonis screen to get back middle. Brissett is going to relocate from the wings, from the slot/wing area, all the way to the left corner, and Doug's going to find him, and he's going to splash it. At that point, it was 28-14, and I'm going to be honest, I really don't think the Hornets recovered after that. So that's all I really have to say about the Hornets Pacers game, because you can't win a game in the first quarter. This is not a coachism. It's just, it's super obvious. You can't win a game in the first quarter, but you sure can lose it. And that's what it felt like the Pacers did to the Hornets.
There was something similar in the game between Memphis and San Antonio. That first quarter was really brutal for San Antonio. And I think it speaks to maybe a similar lack of punch that both San Antonio and Charlotte brought to it. I think the most interesting thing was that Charlotte offensively, they run a lot of beautiful sets. Defensively, I was super confused because they were guarding Doug McDermott like he was me. The really weird angles of attack defensively and just the way that they covered his actions, like if Doug McDermott is in the area, stick him. He was not being stuck on, and he was roaming around freely with very little resistance, whether he's cutting through the paint to get to the opposite side, which typically you want to make kind of difficult for a guy. You want to gum up the actions, mess up the timing, maybe get more off the shot clock than you initially expected. Maybe the guy who has the ball waiting for a dribble handoff or any other type of initiation, he has to do something with it, put it on the ground, get it to the opposite side. You can attack him. You can bring up the weak side. You can cover stuff better. All that stuff helps. That's why defending as a unit is super important, and that's why, there's teams that have fantastic individual defenders that never succeed. But Charlotte, there was so weird. The complete lack of potency to their defense and the lack of attention to detail that allowed the Pacers to move through their sets with very little resistance at any point of contact. And that was really interesting to me, was that it was like Charlotte was like, okay, run your stuff. And then when they'd be caught on a screen, they'd be like, oh, where'd that come from? Oh, whoa, good one, buddy. Like, you surprised me there. And then there's a guy wide open. Or like Edmund Sumner is like, he's getting into a really good attacking position off the catch. And like the gap is there. And they're like, whoa, didn't know we were left that open. And it was just a super confusing defensive game. And Charlotte, I did initially want to do like hat on a hat stuff. And maybe to some degree you could say that about their defense. But offensively, I didn't really have much of a problem with what the Hornets were doing. I just thought this game, and that's the disappointing thing, and maybe what made like the Lakers and the Warriors game so much fun, was that game had like grit and attention to detail, and it was close, and it required big shots. And as fun as it is watching McDaniels recover on guys and just swat the hell out of the ball, and LaMelo Ball running up and down the court, and there was this up and down aspect of that Pacers-Hornets game, it just, when the game isn't close, it's hard to engage with a lot of stuff. And players feel that too, because a lot of stuff, as I said, goes unnoticed defensively or offensively, and the points of contact that typically make reads and reactions really interesting at the NBA level, they weren't really there. So you're just seeing a lot of rote offensive and defensive possessions that you're like, okay, this is basketball, but there's not a lot going on here that's very interesting. It's like very simple, straight up pick and roll basketball on one side, or they're initiating with Sabonis on the other side. And you're like, yeah, this makes sense. So it didn't offer much in the way of intrigue for me, unfortunately.
The regular season and the playoffs are so different that you can throw everything out. You can throw everything out from the regular season carrying over to the playoffs, because it's a completely different game. The sets that work, you might see them sometimes, but that'll only work for a game, maybe even just a half, and then the teams will adjust, and so on and so forth. And since this is a play-in game, maybe that's how the Hornets approached it, is none of the stuff we know that usually works will carry over into the playoffs, so let's just scrap everything. I was really disappointed by it, because the Hornets, for most of the season looked like they could be a team that could not necessarily knock a higher seed off, but make it a competitive series, make it a fight all throughout. And we just didn't see that.
They seem to encompass, there are young teams that come up, and there are really disciplined teams that when they come up, you're like, okay, I understand why that team struggled in the playoffs. The moment gets a little bit bigger, and they have a very, very structured offense that got them regular season wins against teams that weren't inclined to play directly to the playbook, what it dictated that you do defensively to stop these guys. Like most notably is players who start seeing the defenders go under screens in the playoffs as opposed to the regular season. A lot of guys, it's just something that simple is players are like, okay, I'm going under the screen now because it's playoff time. You're not going to get any downhill momentum. You're going to have to shoot it at this level on this stage. And I think the Hornets have quite a few players who you would think would be able to kind of buck that. They have really dynamic players like Devontae Graham going downhill, maybe not, but as a shooter. Terry Rozier in the biggest moments this year, despite his, I think, very lackluster playmaking, and his defense isn't great, even though that was like his calling card when he first came into the league. It's a guy who made a bunch of big shots this year in chaotic contexts as a Hornet. And LaMelo Ball and PJ Washington, Miles Bridges, Cody Zeller, super, super good player as far as field goes at that 5. And I thought that they could produce some punch, whether they win a series or not. That doesn't really matter to me. It's just whether they're playing good basketball. And it did feel like it wasn't there for them. That unabashed ability to play in that way felt like it would be to their advantage, but it just wasn't there at all, which I thought was interesting, to say the least. Can I ask you a question about Sabonis? What are your expectations of Sabonis based off of this game heading into, the game that is tonight, and perhaps the playoffs and beyond? Because some people with big man initiators expect that you can get the ball out of their hands and you can control them a little bit easier, and you can do it without allowing downhill momentum. Like what we're going to talk about later with Curry and Draymond is that they could get the ball out of Curry's hands, but they did have to sacrifice downhill momentum to a ball handler. With Sabonis, is there anything you're kind of interested to see in the playoffs or in this play-in game that we won't cover, but we'll be playing, in a couple hours?
Right away, the thing that jumps out is the Pacers are in trouble because you can game plan, you can scheme Sabonis out of the offense, or simply say, okay, you want to be, if you're the offensive hub and they run actions off of you with the ball in the post or the high post, whatever, okay, go for it. And then you force him to, I think about it like the Steve Nash, the strategy against Steve Nash in the early Suns days, or in those Suns days, is you're not going to, Steve Nash might beat you with a 48-point game. He might. But to expect him to be able to do it 4 out of 7, or maybe even just a winner-take-all game against Robin Lopez and so on and so forth, you can just throw bodies at him. You're not scared of anybody else. And unfortunately for the Pacers, Karis LeVert, TJ Warren, Miles Turner, not available. So who's there who's going to be able to help him? TJ McConnell. Love TJ McConnell and all that he does, the bumblebeeing that he does. But he's not scary. You can scheme out Doug McDermott. If you're game planning for the two of them, say Sabonis beat us with your scoring, Malcolm Brogdon beat us with your shooting, you don't have, well, if you're the defense, that's a winning recipe because you can live with that. If they beat you, okay, great. But if they beat you and it's a 7-game, or not a 7-game series, it's a series setting, that's going to win you a game, maybe 2, but that is not a winning recipe. So going forward, yeah, it's really tough to say Sabonis can do all of these things, but you take all of his weapons away. He's a great passing big, but it's not really as threatening as it would be if there was shooting and playmaking on the floor.
That's another big part of it. And this is something that Lewis and I covered for Minute Basketball, was that in the post is Sabonis in particular, aided by second spectrum data, was way more potent as a passer than a finisher, or I guess a guy who finishes his own created shots. Like, it makes sense to use him as a fulcrum, but as you say, with players injured, with guys out, you're asking him to create for more and more limited players. And how teams react to that defensively, I think, will be really interesting, and what that dictates of Sabonis and what he decides, like, what is his threshold for what he's supposed to be taking offensively. That's one of the most interesting questions that can be asked of any player in the NBA, is like, what are you being given? How much are you willing to take? Because defenses can game plan according to that. And it does help somewhat because some players are not comfortable. It just puts them way out of their comfort zone to do something like that. And I think it's really interesting that Sabonis, a guy who the biggest part of his offense is his ability to play make and glean advantages for his teammates. It's not that he's scoring straight up by himself in the post. He can do that, but that isn't his biggest strength in that area. It is the playmaking. And a more and more limited roster, I think, makes these upcoming games, this game against the Wizards, which will decide if they're in, and, you know, if they do go into a series, to see how that plays out. And, you know, if it's Joel Embiid, if it's Alex Len, whoever's on the other side of it, I think is really, really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't have anything else to add. It's so tough because the Pacers would be a very exciting team. You know, minus the drama, a lot of drama. Minus
There's drama?
So I hear. I'm sure our friends who cover the Pacers are very happy with what's happening right now. Yeah, Sabonis as a playmaker, very effective. And we talked about this with Caitlin on her episode. And as you said, gleaning advantages. He, as a screen setter even, he is able to interpret space very effectively. Not just bone-crushing screens, re-angled, setting his hips, flipping the screen, etc., etc. When you don't have that on the floor and you're expecting Sumner, Holiday, Goga to be your guys, it's a tough ask. It's a tough ask. And, you know, I believe the stat is, or no big man has ever covered as much ground defensively as Sabonis has over the course of the season. And you'd love to say, you know, for one game he can channel it. Maybe he can. But even if they do win, taken into a series, like, it's going to wear on your legs. It's going to run you down. And there's only so much that a player like that can do.
It's also, what is the meaning of all that defensive movement? Really, what, like, Sabonis, I understand they use him in the same role that Pascal Siakam is used in Toronto. Nate Bjorkgren comes from the Nick Nurse coaching tree, and they run a lot of the same stuff offensively too. But one of those guys, based on eye test, based on analytics, you can tell is much more successful in that type of role. And what is the purpose really of putting Sabonis in that type of role where he's at times aimless, trying to catch up to plays defensively? It's, yeah, misused. I think it's fair to say misused to some degree defensively. And offensively, I think that he is being used very well. But, you know, is that the best way to get everything out of the team? Who knows? Teams like the Pacers are trying to, you know, MacGyver some of their actions all the time anyway, because they don't have the obscene star talent that other teams do. So, yeah, it's interesting. Do you want to talk Griz Spurs?
Yes. I'm very excited to, yes.
I'm going to start. So I wanted to focus on the first and second quarters of this game because basically you're looking at huge scoring disparity between the two teams, and it went each way. So in the first quarter, the Grizzlies dominated. In the second quarter, it, like, in a miraculous 7 minutes roughly, Jonas Valanciunas didn't play in the second quarter. And he was a +5. In a quarter, they lost by, I think, 14. That's, to me, insane, and it speaks to what made it go in the first quarter. So Jaren Jackson Jr. is starting at the 4. Kyle Anderson is at the 3. You have Jaw, you have Dylan Brooks at the 1 and the 2, and then you have Jonas in the middle. And an ode to drop defense, I think. And what made this so interesting is that, and I have this quote here, I can't remember who was the broadcast partner with Doris Burke, because I started listening to the new St. Vincent album during that, so I only caught the start of the game. But the funny thing is, right, the quote, "This is what they like to do. Give it to DeRozan and shoot mid-range jump shots," end quote. Just an incredible thing to say. But if you're playing a drop defense, ideally, you're going to carve them up. They're going to allow you your strength. And of course, it's not that simplistic. The Spurs don't like to give it to DeRozan and shoot mid-range jump shots. I think that's like way too simplistic and doesn't cover what you're getting by moving DeRozan downhill, putting them in positions where they have to either step up, keep dropping, how are they playing strong side and weak side at the wings, that kind of stuff. In this case, though, the Grizzlies were extremely aggressive coming in from the wings. So they were dropping and pinching. And they just had this thing where they were just crowding the Spurs players so much. And only in the second quarter, when the Spurs players like DeMar, like DeJounte, they kind of learned a little bit how to deal with that. Because if you watch the game, and there will be, clips of it, the Grizzlies were kind of overwhelming. That's a lot of size in there. Jaren Jackson Jr. coming off of the wing, just because they're only playing one big on the other side. The Spurs are just playing Poeltl. So he's either guarding DeMar or Kyle Anderson, and those guys are spotted on the wing. If Jaren Jackson Jr. is on DeMar and DeJounte Murray or Keldon Johnson wants to get a foot in the paint, and Jaren Jackson Jr. is the guy digging down, or he gets to just have a rear view contest without committing to anything because of the guy who's sitting on the wing that is maybe going to shoot a catch and shoot 3, maybe good, maybe bad. They provided so much pressure on the Spurs players. And it was only when the Spurs realized, I can't be scared of this size. I just have to attack it because that's my strength. I have to use craft. I have to use my explosiveness. We saw DeJounte Murray get to the rim in the second quarter and DeMar DeRozan get to the free throw line. Even though he was 1 for 9 in that quarter, he was still a huge driving force for the Spurs. And that spoke to, a team that is now out of it. The Spurs, they're not going to make the playoffs. And who knows what this team looks like next year. Maybe DeMar DeRozan isn't even there. DeJounte will be for a long time, I presume. But it is that drop defense is extremely effective, not for what it's taking away, but for what it's giving. And everybody thinks it's the opposite. And I think this is most astutely pointed out by playing against a team that succeeds in that fashion. You're giving them what they are known for, quote unquote. That's why I think that quote at the start is important. The Grizzlies are giving the Spurs what they excel at. DeMar DeRozan, DeJounte Murray, Rudy Gay, all of them good pull-up mid-range shooters. They can put one dribble down, get into space, hit the jumper. And the Grizzlies said, hang out in that area and you'll lose. And they did. So you talked about it before, but you can't win a game in the first quarter, but you can lose a game in the first quarter. 38-19 in the first quarter, the Grizzlies went up on the Spurs. Not pretty. Not at all. And it was largely because the Grizzlies, they just blitzed them. And not literally a blitz in that coverage, but they crowded them. They made them so uncomfortable and took away the regular quirks and rhythms of their offense, which I think historically DeMar DeRozan has struggled with in the playoffs, and DeJounte Murray did in that game as well. So you're taking these ball handlers and you're saying the reads that you usually make, we're taking away the thing that you like to do as well. And that's one of the most interesting things of defense is it's to put guys in new positions or positions that they might not expect and to ask them to deal with it on the fly. Some guys, like Jayson Tatum, 50 points, putting everybody on his back, he did a great job being reactionary, reacting to the stimuli of the defense. The Spurs struggled to push through that because it's like this, what is it? In the Simpsons movie, they put the dome over top.
Beside the point. What are you telling us we're trapped like rats?
No, rats can't be trapped this easily. You're trapped like carrots.
And that's kind of how I felt that the Spurs players were within the confines of the Grizzlies defense. And maybe there's no example better than when Keldon Johnson caught the ball on a kick out. And we've talked about Keldon before. We both are huge fans of Keldon. Just this explosive, like there's TNT below his feet. He's exploding to the rim. He was converged on by 4 Grizzlies. And that bounce in the air, still keep finishing over top. No, he couldn't get there. There was too many bodies. There was too much resistance. He loses the ball, and Dylan Brooks is going the other way and throws down a massive hammer.
Coming back the other way, Brooks flying, body.
So that was the interesting part to me, is that the Spurs are doing the same thing on the other side with Jakob Poeltl. And while they kind of got blown up at the start of the game, which made Jakob's plus-minus kind of funky, the Spurs were definitely at their best with him in the middle, something they went away with towards the end of the game. But Poeltl playing that drop defense against the Grizzlies, who are the kings of the floater. Joe Wolfond wrote about the floater last year. He did this huge thing on it. It was fantastic if you want to know more about floaters, for example. But the Grizzlies, they shoot a lot of them. They love floaters. And so both teams, the Spurs and the Grizzlies, are proficient, at least prolific, in the mid-range. Both play drop defenses, and both struggled to score all game. It's not about what you take away. It's about what you allow. And I think that's, maybe that's something with Sabonis as well, right? Is if you're trying to goad him into more possessions where he's a scorer in the post and all that kind of stuff, what are you incentivizing from the offense? Because you can never take anything away. So what do you incentivize? Because teams are so good at getting what they want. Give them an easier route to something that you want. And I think that's the beauty of it. And do it with players that you're well equipped to do it with. Kyle Anderson, who's playing nominally as a big, they're hedging all the actions. DeJounte Murray is shooting under and trying to catch up. Kyle Anderson is using his length to pop out. Even though he's slow, he's popping out. He's covering the right angles. DeJounte's catching up. Rudy Gay, same thing. Hedging with those guys, dropping with Valanciunas, and finding a way to beat the Spurs, who, coming into this game, should have had a means to counter that type of defense. I thought that was awesome, and it's tough to go away from what's being given to you, which is why the Spurs succeed in the second quarter, but it's also why they struggled at the end of the game, because DeJounte Murray, young player, hasn't had – well, he was injured when they went in the playoffs last time, I believe, so I'm not sure he has any playoff success. You're asking this guy to keep making the counterintuitive reads and that kind of stuff against the defense. So it's kind of dried up at the end of the game too. So I just thought that was really interesting, the interplay of drop defense and how it affected this game, especially given the strengths of each roster.
Yeah, but more can be said. It's so strange because the context of, especially when you look at both 9-10 playing games, you'd expect the team that lost to have been able to bring a little more to the table. The Spurs, you said it, and you said it best, but the Grizzlies, I wouldn't say, I don't believe they skated by, but I would have loved to have seen what it would have looked like if there were a few more counters early on, because San Antonio got in a big hole early on, and it was a 4-point win for the Grizzlies. Those counters early, maybe they make all the difference.
Once San Antonio introduced players who weren't stuck in that kind of, okay, like there are a certain number of reads and advantages that DeJounte and DeMar are going to grant you, and the Grizzlies were very good early on at mitigating those strengths and just saying, like, let's stick to your weaknesses. Or if it's your strength, it's a strength for you relative to how other players do it. But league-wide and how we view this shot, it's still not really a strength for an offense that's trying to beat us. And then once San Antonio started incorporating more stuff with like Rudy Gay and Patty Mills, getting those pin downs for Patty Mills where he can read the defender trying to go under and come out on top, he can just pop back out into space. It operates like a flare, but it's not a flare. It's just how he's reading it. And just introducing new stuff like that for the Grizzlies to keep up with, it came late. And that's actually a little bit surprising. As you said, it came late. And had it come earlier, maybe you stick around. And because how much better are the Grizzlies than the Spurs? I think it's fair to say they're better. The Grizzlies impress me. I like the Grizzlies a lot. And truthfully, I don't know who I want to win between the Grizzlies and their conglomerate of extremely likable players or the Warriors and their selection of a few likable players, plus having Steph Curry in the playoffs is like very fun and hellacious. Who knows? But the Spurs dug themselves a hole in an elimination game, and they did it without putting up much resistance. That was a little bit strange to me. Too eager to get the ball out of DeMar's hands early. Too eager to let Keldon Johnson be the guy with the ball in his hands with 10 seconds left on the shot clock. It is potent defense if you can maneuver the offense into where you want them, even if that might be something they feel a little bit comfortable in, whatever. Have somebody in the spot you want them in. That way you dictate how you react to it. If they're putting you into a position where suddenly guys are making rotations that they're not used to making and all that kind of stuff, everything's going to go pear-shaped very quickly. The Grizzlies, especially early, did a fantastic job of setting up their defense so that they could maintain their shell the way they're comfortable with. And the Spurs didn't do a good enough job of moving them away from that early.
Speaking to your point about these reads and these counters and getting guys the shots where you want them to get their shots as opposed to what the defense wants. Maybe my eyes were glazed over because, the Grizzlies looked like they were going to run away with it early, but I didn't see as much of deploying someone like Patty Mills in invert action. I can specifically think of one play where it was early offense. Rudy Gay is bringing the ball down on the right side, and Patty Mills is lifting up from the corner, and he sets a step-up screen onto Rudy Gay, and then he comes open to the right slot area. And then the defense has to make a choice at that point. Are we switching? Are we dropping and it's Patty Mills? Are we chasing? It's that type of stuff that you can't drop against Patty Mills. That's a counter that was there. Like I said, I might be wrong about this, but I don't feel that they did enough in the sense that, you're forcing the defense to choose now, as opposed to this is what they want us to take. We're going to take it. Make them a little more uncomfortable. Patty Mills as a screener being deployed in that invert action, who knows if that would have been the answer, but try something else. It's a winner-take-all game. It's not the 7-8 game where the loser gets another chance to play. It's if we lose this game, we're done. Why why keep bullets in the chamber at that point, So, I don't know. It confused me. Both 9-10 games really, really, really threw me.
And that's the thing about basketball is you're constantly trying to polarize outcomes. And sometimes you accomplish that in a one-game series, in a play-in. And the Pacers and the Hornets, it ends up in a game that has very little, value as an entertainment thing. It's just there's not a lot to take from it unless you just love watching, the back end of the Hornets actions. And it doesn't matter if it's a close game. You just like to see basketball walked out, which for some people, yes, but some people like the intrigue of competition. In fact, I would hazard a guess to say most people do. And to see teams like throw the wrench in the other team and to not have the back and forth of a full series is really interesting, because that's why basketball is in a one game thing, because it's so high possession and it's such a runs game that, you give a series so you can see how things really measure out and how teams respond. And so in the one game, it's close and it's tough because the team figured it out to some degree. In the other game, the Hornets, they didn't figure anything out. Nothing, at all. Okay. Wizards, Celtics, Beal has got a hamstring thing. Russell has a Russell thing. Okay. They're both just trying to go out there and win some basketball games. Robin Lopez is Hakeem Olajuwon or Bill Russell or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Will Chamberlain, whoever. He is throwing up hook shots. He's hitting them. He is the hub of all good things in Washington. And on the other side, the Boston Celtics, I really like Jaylen Brown. And I'm not just saying this because Jayson Tatum scored 50. You can go search up my tweets that include the word Tatum or whatever. I've been very consistent with this, okay? Don't ever say that Jaylen Brown is the crown jewel on the Celtics. And I like Jaylen Brown. I think he's not only like a fantastic person, but also a really impressive basketball player. Jayson Tatum is not generational, but he's so good. And I don't know why anyone would ever be excited to say like, I don't see it because he had a 14-point game in February or whatever. Like, this guy absolutely crumbled the Raptors last year and did it without breaking a sweat. He had to take on this hellacious defense last year and make reads that he didn't have to make all year, and he started making them, and the Raptors had to sell out completely defensively to stop him. They figured out how to stop Kemba. They figured out how to stop Jaylen Brown. They never once figured out how to stop Tatum because Tatum, his tool set, his skill set, that bag is deep, and not only deep in that he'll pull things out, but he'll pull them out often, and he'll be efficient with them. The 50-point game is not an aberration. That is a proper reflection of how he can make defenses sweat, and especially with Washington, bad ones. What are your thoughts on the game?
So just to touch on Jayson Tatum, the game plan I think that I saw the Raptors employ last playoffs was make Tatum make reads. And that was at a point where he had not proven he could consistently make those reads. In that series, he proved time and again, this is the right play. I'm going to make it. As we talked about in that Feel episode, a reactive passer. Primary scorer mindset, but growing reactive passer. So that was one step. And then to continue the ascendance this game, he reacted to everything the defense gave him. He was just able to do everything he needed to do. We jump into the clips right away. I have, for the sake of throwing some Washington in there, I have a Wizards Spain play. Russell Westbrook comes down, Alex Len sets the screen, Bradley Beal sets the back screen. And because of all the switching that happens, Beal is able to shake open up top, and then he's able to attack Marcus Smart. And he's able to get a score out of this. Just wanted to throw some Washington in there.
One moment. I have another Washington play. Chicago on the left side of the floor. Beal comes up. He comes off the stagger, gets downhill, makes a really good read. He fakes the pass. Well, not really fakes, but he makes the defense think, the Celtics, that he's passing to the corner. It goes out to the above the break. For whatever reason, Russell Westbrook gets a pump fake. He gets Marcus Smart off his feet. Don't know why Marcus Smart jumped at a three-point shot from Russell Westbrook. But Westbrook comes downhill, and who's creeping in from the weak side still? Daniel Gafford. Lob, dunk. I really like Gafford. I've been very, very encouraged by his performances in Washington, mostly defensively, to say, like, wow, this guy – in Chicago, I didn't think he had like any type of defensive output. I just thought the same way when I saw Clint Capella in like 2014-15 around that time, wow, this guy can catch lobs. And he plays with guys who throw lobs. That's good. Daniel Gafford is a guy who can catch lobs, and people threw him lobs. That was who he was. And you're like, that type of explosion, hopefully he can translate that elsewhere. Maybe he'll start to do that at a more regular, consistent level in Washington. For how long, who knows? For what that team looks like in the future, who knows? But I just thought that was a nice play, and I have nothing else to say on the matter.
No, yeah, I mean, let's give Washington some love because they made it really hard on Jayson Tatum early. Stars shine at the brightest stage. Let's go 40 seconds left in the second quarter. The Celtics have a sideline out of bounds play. Tristan Thompson springs open at the top. Nobody's going to guard him ever out there. Romeo Langford inbounds the ball. Kemba Walker sets a back screen. Not just the Celtics, but the Celtics were one of the first teams that I noticed do this. And we talked about it back when you had me as a guest on your podcast, all the way back when, last playoffs. Kemba Walker sets a back screen for Romeo Langford. Jayson Tatum now has the ball on the right slot. Kemba Walker is now going to get a screen, rip that back screen, screen the screener action. Kemba Walker comes uncorked. They chase. Tristan Thompson spaces out. And now Jayson Tatum has an ISO on Bradley Beal on the right elbow. Now he can go to work. He ends up getting a step back fade and one, the beginning. Jump to first play in the second half. Boston is set up in a Horns formation, it looks like, with Fournier and Tatum, and they cross. They cross so that Tatum is on the left wing, Fournier gets the ball on the right wing. Now Bradley Beal is tight on Jayson Tatum. Evan Fournier gets a side ball screen from Rob Williams, and Jayson Tatum is getting a hammer screen, obviously on the other side. Fournier drives baseline, kicks it to Tatum. Beal gets lost on a step because Marcus Smart sets that screen. Jayson Tatum pump, drive, foul, and one. Another one. So the Wizards at this point have started to figure out the signature play. Boston, Brad Stevens calls for the same set, it looks like. Marcus Smart is the inbounder. Rob Williams is the player who catches it on the left slot, who catches the inbound pass on the left slot. Kemba Walker looks like he's about to set a back screen on Marcus Smart. He ghosts it and then uses a Rob Williams screen to spring open. Westbrook is able to contain the first action, escape dribble to the left, pull up. At this point, Kemba was starting to feel it a little bit. Fast forward to another sideline out of bounds play. This time, the Wizards don't know if Kemba's setting that back screen or he's ghosting it, so you have to be able to talk. Marcus Smart inbounds the ball to Tristan Thompson. Tristan Thompson swings it to Jayson Tatum on the right slot. Kemba Walker sets a back screen for Marcus Smart's man. Marcus Smart uses it and then flips it. So there's a double screen for Kemba Walker to come off, spring open for a three-pointer. Just like we talked about earlier, it's the little stuff. Why leave bullets in the chamber in a winner-take-well, it's not a winner. Well, it is a winner-take-all game, but it's not an elimination game just yet. But why mess around why tempt fate? So not next time down, but another play is Marcus Smart is entered the ball at the right elbow. And then Kemba cuts from the middle of the floor to the strong side corner. And Jayson Tatum looks like he's going to use a screen to come to the left elbow and get swung the ball. Bradley Beal is top locking him, trying to deny him from using that. And Jayson Tatum, I haven't seen this used in a little while. Manu Ginobili, the Spurs used to run this play where he used to cut down and then zipper up. And then after he would zipper up, they would swing him the ball and he would attack off the dribble. But teams started denying that. So Manu instinctively started going backdoor on that zipper, take a couple of steps, go the opposite direction, cork open for a layup. Now you don't know what he's going to do. Jayson Tatum got a lob from that action. Beal was top locking him. Their arms are locked. Tatum creates space. I'm not going to say he pushed off because he didn't. He creates space because their arms are tangled, and he gets uncorked for an oop. Like that's when I'm talking about reactive plays. Tatum is making these reads not only as a passer anymore, not to say that he wasn't before, but his feel for the game, shout out Evin Zaucha, his feel for the game is growing by leaps and bounds. And if you don't like Jayson Tatum, I really don't. I don't know what to say to you.
I will always be very appreciative of what Jayson Tatum does because it is meaningful for like Bradley Beal, for example, and Russell Westbrook, but maybe to a lesser degree. Who knows what Beal, when he really wants to play defense, what that looks like. But Beal is a guy who, if you were to say he's better on offense than he is on defense, you'd say, well, yes, great. That's awesome. But here's the thing. He's an incredible offensive player. That's good for Beal. But it is not meaningful that he's a better offensive player than he is defensive because he's so bad. Tatum, to say that he's better offensively than he is defensively is really, really something because he's a monstrously impactful defender, especially at the nail. He disrupts everything. He's so good on that end, and he brings it on the other side too. You know, even if he's not a guy who every game is going to give you 20 and some games he'll kind of, you know, sit back and evaluate a little bit more and be like a little bit less, you know, impactful offensively. You know, he has his ebbs and flows, but I don't expect it in the playoffs. I think that he's seizing the moment is like a weird talking point and maybe a bit lazy for a podcast like this, but I think that it is valid, especially since we're not going to turn it into like a 4-minute segment, just for me to say, in addition to you pointing out in all these actions how he made it work, this is a guy who can sense a moment, can sense trends in game, and can react accordingly.
And that's one of the best things about Jayson Tatum is he's not forcing the action in a way you'd expect an alpha scorer or whatever you would typically associate with a player like this. It's not that he shies away from the moment. It's that you understand that there are times to make the right read and there are times to try and go get something because that is the right read. And Jayson Tatum he's grown on the biggest Eastern Conference Finals his rookie year, dunks on LeBron. He's been he's gone deep into the playoffs every single year, and those reps matter because those reads matter, and you get not a sense of the moment in the typical sense. It's an understanding of, okay, there's nothing going versus the read of there's nothing there versus it's time to go, I'm going to get mine. And that's not really what it's been, in my opinion. It's how can I manipulate the defense to get this action? And like we continue to talk about, his growth as a reactive passer makes all of that happen because he's a lethal scorer. But when he starts to shift from A+ reactive passer to proactive passer, now you're looking at that next level, that next step. I don't know if it will necessarily come in these playoffs, but that's the next step. That's where I expect him to go further.
Due to scheduling conflicts, we'll be reconvening for you in seconds, but for us in a few hours to discuss Lakers and Warriors. So enjoy that right away. Hey, welcome back. Those couple seconds for you went by really quickly. And so now we're here to discuss Lakers, Warriors. Some are calling it an instant classic. Some are saying, you know, just a pretty good game. It did have vibes, and mostly because of the players that were involved, it was somewhat reminiscent of a finals game between LeBron and Steph. They both brought it. The biggest difference, I think, off the start is something I'll address that really was a hindrance for the Warriors. This is something I discussed with the Grizzlies, is what are you allowing the other team to get? And so the Warriors have Draymond Green and Steph Curry offensively, and Wiggins, who was pretty damn good. Jordan Poole provides a bit of something. Mulder didn't have his best game. Juan Toscano Anderson is trying to emulate stuff from Draymond. So that's good. It's very good to be like Draymond, but you're also not providing much of a scoring punch. Late in games, when they were blitzing those actions and they are just doubling hard, really hard doubles to get the ball out of Curry's hands, basically what they were forfeiting was downhill momentum to Draymond Green. 4-on-3 situations, but they were zoning up and leaving the guy they wanted to get the ball. So they were still in control to some degree because they decided what they were comfortable with, and they were actually able to really limit what happened to the Warriors offense. That's big time. That's really great. And it speaks to the level of discipline that the players at the back end had and the ability to catch up after they dictated the ball leave Steph Curry's hands, because they weren't doubling him off ball. They were doubling him on ball. So when Anthony Davis steps up to the level of the screen and they start doubling, he has to get back into the play. His hustle, or LeBron, whoever was the doubler, the person who was joining the double, their ability to get back was fantastic. And if the possession went a way that they didn't like, they were pretty good at scram switching back into a matchup that they did like. Something that is important to note. The Warriors were also very good at doing this to the Lakers. They didn't like what they were giving up. They'd scram out of it and get back into the position. Now, the biggest difference towards the end of the game is that scramming when you're keeping Steph on the perimeter is going to leave some things like Steph's relocation threes. That was something that they tended to kind of fall back on, and they had to give up. They did a decent job of limiting it, but that was still a counter that Steph had. It's harder for the defense to contain a LeBron drive while in rotation than it is to contain a Steph relocation, because the ball is still in LeBron's hands. Now, I'm not saying LeBron is a better offensive operator this year or anything like that. It's just that given the limitations of that Warriors offense and how if the ball didn't end up in the right player's hands to attack that moving defense of the Lakers, they weren't going to get anything meaningful. And the Lakers could even play it sometimes that they really incentivize a Draymond 3. And if Draymond doesn't take that, he's basically neutering the advantage that Steph's gravity created. Big brain defense, great discipline from the Lakers. To see teams scram, I love it. It's one of my favorite things teams do on defense, and that they were doing it in the right situations and holding the Warriors to difficult shots and long possessions that were dragged out above the break, trying to get the ball back to Steph. Huge win for them. And yes, LeBron hit that three, but the reason they got back in it was because they took away what Steph was able to do offensively, and they made other players beat them. And that's why they won, because the other players did not beat them. A little bit of the punch of what I'm going to say here is taken away by, I will link it, and I'll put a picture of their tweet because they deserve recognition. I don't remember it right now, but they gathered the stats and the video of Andrew Wiggins on LeBron James. So kudos to you. Big shout out. You did a fantastic job. But that is worth talking about. And I promise, I messaged Evin before your tweet went up. I'm not just biting your style. So my apologies, but we're just going to have to share. So anyway, Wiggins at the point of attack was borderline transcendent. It is not easy to handle LeBron James. And to do so without deeming that you need help at all times is a whole other thing. To pick him up at full, three-quarter court, half court, never, ever any less than that. To probe and just bite at his dribble as he's trying to get up the court and delay the clock so that there's less permutations for the offense to work through, providing that resistance at every moment. So good. I talked about this on the last episode, actually. Wiggins, I'm ready to just declare that he's good now. And he is. Not only was he good offensively, but defensively, he put together a sterling effort where those long arms, his ability to catch up, really helped in defending LeBron. We saw this with a Warrior in the past, Andre Iguodala. It's not about not getting bumped off your line by LeBron. It's about catching up after you've been bumped off that line. Andrew Wiggins has the explosion, he has the quick feet, and he has the quick jump that his contests after getting back into the play are actually really, really effective at the rim and for jump shots. His footwork, his angles, he impressed me so much. Andrew Wiggins deserves a lot of love for what he's done. I was super happy with what he did. And Kuzma, too. Different team, but Kuzma, I mean, wow. Clever cutter, pretty good defensive awareness in this one. It wasn't like one of those Kuzma goes 3 for 3 from downtown in the first quarter games, but it was just all the little parts of Kuzma's game that he's been developing over time. I think it comes to fruition in a performance like this which he has more often now. And big guys who decide that they can defend with awareness is like a really big deal. And we'll talk about it probably a bunch once we start breaking down the 76ers, for example. But Kuzma stepping into that role, playing defense at that level, super meaningful, and being an aware and intelligent cutter off ball, all very big, very good things. The Lakers are going to be in the playoffs. We'll get to talk about Anthony Davis more. We'll get a longer, runway of what this means. He had a lot of trouble in this game, and, we'll explore that more. But I don't want to do a one-game sample with him because one-game samples with superstars especially seems like, it doesn't reveal much. There's more to it, typically. But I think off the dome, that's mostly what I wanted to highlight in that game. And also, LeBron saying he saw 3 rims at once, classic. I mean, I wrote that line in Minute Basketball about how LeBron meticulously crafts narratives for himself to beat. And I was like, is it corny? Yes. Do I blame him? No, not at all. I wrote that before that game happened, for the record. And because LeBron, you just know he's going to deify himself more than he already is. And that's the thing. Athletes are not gods among men and women. Whether it's like Diana Taurasi, LeBron James, whoever's achieving whatever, it's incredible. But they need not be deified. Sports journalism, media, those snakes, put these athletes in a position where they have to defend themselves all the time, and you have to meet the expectation of a god. So you constantly have to set up narratives for yourself, hurdles that may not exist, like seeing 3 rims at once, LeBron, for you to jump over. LeBron, to me, is probably the greatest player of all time, and he wouldn't ever have to say anything to convince me. But there are people who listen to Stephen A. Smith and Skip Bayless and read Kendrick Perkins tweets all day that are convinced by those types of optics, and the athletes have to deign to convince them through those means. Hey, that's life. But we can do better. We can do better.
We're trying. We are trying. What I hope doesn't get lost in the shuffle of a battle between the two players that have faced off the most for the NBA championship in recent history, Frank Vogel and the Lakers staff, and Steve Kerr, and that Warrior staff.
Noted lazy coach. They don't do anything.
Yep. The defensive game plans were just, if anybody wanted to sit down with me in a socially distanced way and break down Laker rotations and what the Warriors were doing, and that's kind of what we're doing here, yes, but this game was this is the game that makes the rest of the play-in games so frustrating in retrospect, because the adjustments, tinkering, machinations, that was all on offer here. Alex Caruso, Andrew Wiggins, Draymond Green, KCP, Wesley Matthews, they all had great defensive games, unless I'm lumping them in. I can tell you the first 3 are for sure players I want to highlight for having great defensive games. But Alex Caruso, he's a meme. I get it. It looks cool. He's Ernie Johnson's son, whatever. But the truth, he played a great game. There was he had a couple of highlight blocks, but the little stuff he did, especially on not the game-winning assist, but the play at the end of the game where LeBron gives the ball up because they throw 2 on him, I believe.
They were shading him.
With Steph.
Caruso angled to get the driving lane. He attacked boom. As soon as he caught the pass, he was basically already in motion. Beautiful dump off pass to AD, dunk.
Right. Yeah, and that's exactly it. It's stuff like that where they are so connected offensively, but more so defensively, is that if you watch that play again and you slow it down, it's masterful because, like you said, he angles himself to give himself the right way to attack. And as soon as he starts to attack, Davis is crashing in on that cut because he knows Draymond has to help. And Steph is recovering back to KCP. And genuinely, we'll slow this down. LeBron gives the ball up. Steph is trying to get around Wiggins to recover to KCP. By the time Steph is actually back onto KCP, Caruso is dropping the ball off to Anthony Davis. That's a level of connectedness that, like, well, obviously they are the reigning champs for a reason, but like that's stuff that's feel, read, connectedness, and reps. That's everything coming in together. And like the last shot, yeah, it was great. Did you see 8 rims? Did you see 1 rim? It doesn't matter. He made the shot. Cool. But I think that's the play that like I will remember. Offensively, anyway. Defensively, those last two possessions for the Lakers, what can you say? You can watch that over and over again because they know what's coming, but it's that old adage, right, of like, even though you know it's coming, you still can't stop it. The Lakers knew what was coming. They were able to stop it. A lot of people were saying, like, you know, as crazy as it is to go to Steph in that situation, he should still be the one taking the shot. And there's another school of thought that said everybody knew he was taking that shot. The Lakers were the best defense in the league. He should not be the one taking that shot. He should be more of a decoy. And, you know, who's to say who is right on that? Because it could have played out any number of ways. And if the shot was made, then, you know, whoever said the points stand. My point is, watch it again. The communication they have, the way Anthony Davis, we're going to put the play here. I don't have it in front of me at this moment, but
some great defenders and great defenses make it seem like you don't gain advantages from passes. And that's what the Lakers were on late in the game. Like, a pass is only a possible turnover. It's not a possible advantage. That's how good the Lakers defense was in recovery. That's how good they were at squeezing the guy on ball into uncomfortable positions. It was masterful.
Yep, that's it. And that's the value of having these world-ending defensive minds, right? Because Anthony Davis can see a play before the play happens and connect that play. LeBron is QBing that defense. Draymond Green on the other end, like he made AD's life miserable, and I'm sure enough will be made of that we don't have to talk about it. But these are the little things that you forget in an offensive duel between, you know, two of the best players of all time, and certainly of this generation. But just the way both teams were able to muck it up, and the way the Lakers were able to muck it up enough at the end, there's not enough excitement in it about those moments for me, and I really just want to celebrate that.
I do want to talk a little bit about Draymond, but not in like he made Anthony Davis, like not in that type of way, but more so Draymond is so impactful defensively that when you get that odd man advantage, when you're 4-on-3 headed downhill, sometimes the prospect of beating Draymond at the cat and mouse game is so daunting that you just surrender and you take the jump shot that you've been afforded. That is the power of Draymond Green, is that the bounce pass in the lane, which works against 27 out of 30 bigs that are starting in that game in the league, he's going to swipe it. And not only that, but of those 3 other bigs, he is the most mobile. And of those 3 other bigs, his route efficiency is also the best. Hands, route efficiency, mobility, and tenacity to contest at the rim. All those things are packaged every possession, and you have to try and beat it. And if you lose it once, he's going to attack you. And it's just like, how do you beat this guy heading downhill? Because it just seems like he doesn't take the wrong step, ever. That's the wonderful thing is, you know, I'm reading through Dune with a good friend, Louis Zatzman, and prescience is a huge part of those books. Draymond is borderline prescient defensively. His ability to make reads and to punish players who don't make them quicker than he does, or at least of a similar time frame, he's a killer defensively. And he radically changed how the Lakers attacked for most of the game because Anthony Davis is a fulcrum of that offense, and he completely took the legs out from under him and what he wanted to do. Did they find counters eventually? Did they attack a little bit differently? Yes. But Draymond took away the first, second, and third options through his tenacity, his feel, and his ability to maneuver defensively. It was unbelievable. And it's not just like the on-ball stuff. It's the tags off ball, the zoning up. It's everything. It would be easier to find like a nickel on the beach than it would be to find a defensive misstep from Draymond in this game. He was in rare air. He was very, very good.
Yeah, there's nothing I can add. You captured it perfectly. There's no comparison to that type of performance, especially in a winner take all game. So that's the thing to me is this is something that got cut because of the cutoff from the episode that we kind of lost. But Draymond Green is the type of player you want on your team in a like winner go home situation because he will find a way to affect the game. Game 7 against the Cavs, 7 threes. Like a player who, shoots backpack on, everybody thinks it's funny, but yeah, okay. That's fine. That is his jump shot form. But in the biggest moment, in the biggest game, he was a nightmare defensively, just ruining things for everybody. And this was, 5 years ago? And in this game, didn't affect the offensive box score if you're looking for counting stats. Like, he doesn't have them. Like, just watch the film, look at what he did, and understand that Anthony Davis terrorized the West last year. That bubble playoff run, nobody had an answer for. Nobody. Draymond Green, I don't know what he's listed as now, but for the longest time, let's just say this. I think he's 6'5". I've seen him in person. I know what 6'5" looks like. I know what 6'6" looks like, and he's not that. So, and this is Anthony Davis. I don't know how tall Anthony Davis is or what he's listed as or whatever. I haven't seen him in person, but like the way he was able to ruin this player, this unstoppable offensive force in the West, I don't know if there is even a blueprint to be plucked from this game by another team because you have to have Draymond Green in order to accomplish this game plan.
One thing I thought was really interesting, Draymond has become somewhat of an offensive liability. Even though he's such a good passer in that game, the warts of his offensive game showed up. The interesting thing is that they had a counter, I think, that they weren't sure they wanted to go to. I really liked putting Wiggins in the screening action with Steph. And I liked Wiggins getting the ball downhill because the Lakers were banking on recovery. And Wiggins going downhill isn't recovery. It's like, get there. Otherwise, he's going to the rim. And Wiggins can take contact in air. He can finish through it. And if he gets like that 2-foot step, he's very explosive. If he's catching the ball on the looping lob pass that Steph throws over the double, I think they might be able to put more pressure on the Lakers. They also were maybe, because turnovers were a big deal for the Warriors in this game, maybe they were scared that might result in a few more turnovers and offense the other way for the Lakers, especially considering the Warriors felt pretty good about handling the Lakers in the half court on the other end. All that stuff is a consideration, but I did like when I saw Wiggins as a screener and catching the looping pass over the double. I understand offensively it's better to have Wiggins as a spacer and to have Draymond making passing decisions depending on how the defense is playing. But I think in this specific scenario, I actually would have liked to see the Warriors try that out late in games because Wiggins He's good, man. You get him going downhill, I think he's going to find efficient offense for you. But I think they were afraid of the negative aspect of that and that it would show more often than the positive one. I'm maybe more of a Wiggins optimist than most people, though. So I believe in the optimistic turn. And it really depends on how the Grizzlies play him, because I talked about this in the game of the week when the Warriors played the Grizzlies, and how Dylan Brooks is just such a tenacious guy that he can chase Steph a lot of the time. It'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. But I liked the Wiggins counter. I thought they should have gone to it more often. But there's so many considerations, as I laid out, that it's tough to pull the trigger on something like that, especially when you have Steph and Draymond, which is as tried and true as basically anything that's ever happened in the NBA. So I understand why they didn't move away from it, really.
Yeah. So I can't stop thinking about the conversation Jeff Van Gundy had on the low post of don't think of Andrew Wiggins don't measure him by the standard of being a number one pick. Measure him by the standard of being the third best player on a team that struggled here and there, but ultimately they are a very good team. You give this team, the one that went on that stretch run, the length of the season to do that, who knows what they could do. But, such that it is that they finished at that seed and, they're fighting for their playoff lives now. But Andrew Wiggins, you've been on it all year. You started it with the previews. I said I didn't want to be tricked again of saying this is the year for Andrew Wiggins. I said that. I was wrong. I was very wrong, because some people are talking about Andrew Wiggins getting a little bit of all defensive second team heat, maybe, or maybe it's just the ones that are saying that are just very loud about it. But they're not wrong. His ability to turn the dial up defensively, I don't know if you want him being your third best player, or when Clay gets back, your fourth best player. I don't know what the future holds for him. But if this is the type of defensive performance we can come to expect, that just changes the metrics of the Warriors' game plan going forward.
It's completely pointless and somewhat, meaningful to say the way the Lakers play defense fundamentally does not work if Klay Thompson is on the floor. That completely buckles everything that they were doing. Now, he wasn't, but if you're looking at this Warriors team and let's say you're a Warriors fan watching this and you're like, curse the Lakers and their defense, what will we do next year? And you're from 1722 in Ottenshire, England or something like that, great. But here's the thing. The bones of success were rooted in this game for the Warriors. That is one of the most important things, is to show that you can communicate the values and the ethos of your team, of your organization, to everybody within it. And if you can't do that, it's really hard to win unless you have unbelievable transcendent talent stacked on top of unbelievable transcendent talent, which is becoming maybe a little bit more common in the NBA, but it doesn't look like the Warriors are going to be in that position. So this ability to imbue the Warriors' defensive ethic into a bunch of different players, and Wiggins was already kind of on this heel turn of sorts into a major defensive difference maker. He was already kind of going that way, but there's other players who have started to kind of take on the Warriors ethos, and that wasn't present last year, but you've started to see the roots of it this year, and that's huge. That's very, very meaningful. Do you have any other thoughts from this game? I can't really think of anything I want to touch on. I was going to do maybe Caruso, but as you said, his defense was fantastic. He was great. I think, is there anything you want to touch on for this game?
No, you covered it with the scram switching. I think we talked enough about defense. Yeah, I guess that's it for the first round of the play-ins.
Wow. Evin Gualberto, quote, "I think we've talked enough about defense," end quote. And he'll tell you he was the first guy making defense videos on YouTube.
Some would say, mostly me.
What's the big flex? What do you think is like your call to fame?
Kawhi. Kawhi and Draymond, the first year that Steve Kerr arrived. Well, actually, three things. If we're talking defense, my very first video, I don't remember if it was the first one I published because this might be a little boring for the viewers, but my first video published was an accident. So I used to, YouTube has the unlisted function. I used to put together these little reels to communicate with my family back in the Philippines and like friends like all over the country because I was in college back then. And so I would put together these clips and I would send it to them. And I accidentally published one. I think it was Josh McRoberts. And then people started watching it and I was like, oh, okay, cool. I have no idea how to video edit.
Point forward.
These are just
Charlotte Bobcats.
And so that's what I built off of. But the reason I started the channel was Danny Green. Danny Green in the 2013 finals showed himself to be like the ultimate transition defender. If he is your last line of defense, that's about as good as it can get. And when I played, like, I really prided myself on, like, I'm going to sprint back and be the one in the 2-on-1. And, like, if I can make stuff happen, great. If I can't, I'm already at a disadvantage. I'm supposed to lose. So it's only a win situation there. And so Danny Green was the first video that I really wanted to do. And then the Kawhi and Draymond videos, like, I made a Draymond offense video, like all of the things he could do back when he was still under Mark Jackson. I think that was my favorite video that I had made of like a player who's under the radar. And then, yeah, the Kawhi Draymond finishing 1 and 2, and obviously my videos had nothing to do with it, but finishing 1 and 2 in Defensive Player of the Year voting that year, before voting had ended, like it was really cool to me because like I wasn't sure. I felt like they were the two best defenders in the league, but so those
it's like
videos,
Hannibal Buress with the hands. Like, oh my God, the power that I have in this moment. If you don't put, because Evin used to put in the description that all editing is done by Samson, direct your compliments that way. It no longer says that because we now share editing. And Evin, if you don't put a video of your transition defense overlaid on this, I'm going to be furious.
I don't have any.
You've sent me one. You've sent me one. On
Have
WhatsApp.
I?
On WhatsApp, you've sent me one.
Okay. Yeah, that'll be fun for the viewer to watch somebody who is my height play, try to sprint back in.
Not try. You
recover.
succeed.
I did succeed, yeah. All right, I'll go find that. I'll put that on here. I liked it better when we were talking about when I work out and stuff. Like, that's much less painful.
Okay, so
for me
let's
to,
talk
like-
about that. Okay, so here's the thing. When I asked you what your call to fame is, I thought you were going to say your washboard abs.
Welcome to the end of...
Has the TikTok house contacted you yet?
Weirdly, no.
Okay.
And I'm going to be honest with you, man. I don't think they're going to come calling.
Why not? I'm pissed at this TikTok house and their lack of culture. Okay, I suppose that's like the end of it. So, listener, viewer, we're sorry that we won't be covering the Washington Pacers game or the Warriors Griz game. I mean, maybe we touch on it before we start talking about playoff series, but the next episode we do, we'll already be talking playoffs. So, just as a heads up, we'll decide off screen how we want to cover the playoffs. It could be that we try and do something, and this is actually something you can do. We'd like feedback in the comments this was more of a wide-ranging episode where we covered more topics and we're like a little bit less detailed in some areas than we probably would be if we're just doing a game each. And, you know, it requires a lot of work to move Evin off of specificities. And, you know, we could do that, but we need feedback. If you enjoyed this more than regular, I think there would have to be a very large number of people who say that. And then we can move away because, you know, we like being specific. There's a cool thing about these episodes that, you know, I'm already rambling, but the cool thing about these episodes is they kind of aren't really dated because of what's in them. Is an episode could last as long as a head coach is with that team. And then you could go watch that episode if that head coach moves to another team, like that kind of stuff. It's a way to store takes on sets and how players operate within them. And there's not that many people doing it. And then so we do that in podcast form. Is it as popular as the most popular podcast, the only one that can do 2-hour long episodes? I don't know. Maybe. Who's to say? But yeah, if you want the episodes to be a certain type of way, if you think one is better than the other, you know, maybe we'll do a Patreon and do both. If we can make money doing this, Evin and I cannot stress enough to you how much we will like swan dive into this. So, you know, the more engagement means the more feedback we have. So if there was like 120 likes on a video, I think that would be less meaningful than if there was like 58 likes and a bunch of comments. Because the comments tell us exactly what we need to know. And the ones that aren't just asking Evin to make a video about a different player or something.
Yeah, that's true. I always say this to Samson. That's not true. I don't think I've ever said this. I would rather have a bunch of followers who engage all the time, who are committed, who I'm not committed, but like who are fans enough to give me like feedback that matters, versus, you know, if a video has like 600 views in the first day, like that, and that's roughly what the Spain one did, great. But that tells me that that specific topic was something you wanted to study up on. What you want going forward, that could be different, and we might not be able to cover that in the episode, but we won't know unless you tell us. So let us know. Poe, you want to sign us out?
Episode? Get in the comments, dude. Tell me about my hair.